Hello and welcome to this tutorial on Internet of Things. In this tutorial, I'll be walking you through the process of sending data from Raspberry Pi to AWS IoT Core. So before I proceed, I want to let you know that this tutorial might be a little bit long because I'm trying to send data from one of the best Internet of Things platform, which is Raspberry Pi, to one of the best cloud provider out there, which is AWS. So I'm trying to send from the best board to the best provider to the best cloud provider. So there are a lot of securities, a lot of protocols to follow. So it might be a little bit long, but I'm promising you it's gonna worth it. So stick with me till the end of the tutorial and you are going to enjoy it. So I'm going to be sending data from Raspberry Pi to AWS IoT Core. As you can see here, I'm sending DHT level sensor data, which are temperature and humidity. I also want to let you know that for this tutorial, I'm accessing my Raspberry Pi via headless. So I'm using VNC protocol to access my Raspberry Pi. So once I click on Raspberry Pi.local, I'll be able to access my Raspberry Pi. So if you are yet to set up a Raspberry Pi, you can check a tutorial online on how to set up your Raspberry Pi via headless. And before I proceed, if you find this tutorial useful, don't forget to subscribe and like and share. It means a lot to me and I'm going to appreciate you subscribing to the channel. Thank you. So the first thing we are going to do is to set up our hardware, which is setting up the connection between the Raspberry Pi and DHT level sensor. So let's get straight into the tutorial. Grab a coffee and let's go on this journey. So now let me walk you through the hardware connection. Here I have my DHT and I have my resistor. It's a 10K resistor. I have my breadboard here and I have my Raspberry Pi. Yeah. So as you can see, I'm using a Raspberry Pi 4 for this tutorial. I just got this newly. So I've already set up my connections. I've connected the jumper wires to the Raspberry Pi. So this is the first one. This is connected to pin 1 of the Raspberry Pi. And this is going to be the data pin. It's connected to pin 4 on the Raspberry Pi, that is GPIO4. Not actually pin 4, but GPIO4. And this is connected to pin number 39, which is a ground pin. So don't forget this is pin 1. This is GPIO4. If you have to count, GPIO4 falls to pin number 7. So this is pin number 7, which is GPIO4, and this is pin number 39, which is a ground pin. So I'm going to plug in. I'm going to put this to one side. I'm going to plug in my DHT sensor A. And in this sensor, this is pin 1, pin 2, 3, and 4. So my DHT sensor will come here and I have my 10K resistor in between pin 1 and pin 2. So I'll just go back and plug this in. So I have my 10K resistor in between pin 1 and pin 2. So as I have this is VCC pin, which is pin 1, 3 volts on the Raspberry Pi. It comes to pin 1. And this is the data pin, which is GPIO4, pin number 7 on the Raspberry Pi. It comes to pin 2. So pin 3 will be left unconnected, while the ground pin will go to the last pin, which is pin 4. So this is the whole setup. So I'm using 3 pin, don't forget, pin 1, pin 7, and pin 39. So this is my ground. This is the VCC, which is pin number 1, 3 volts on the Raspberry Pi. And this is GPIO4, which is pin 7 on the Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to connect this to my computer now and do all necessary setup. So I'll be connecting my Raspberry Pi to my computer via headless so that a lot of things will be easy for me to do. I just slot this in and connect this to my computer. Then I'll power on the Raspberry Pi. Alright, so before you can access the Internet of Things services is offered by AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. Of course, the first thing you want to do is to create an account with AWS. So head over to aws.amazon.com. If you don't have an account already, you can click on create an AWS account. And if you have an account set up, you can just click on sign in. On this page, there are a lot of AWS services displayed, so you can feel free to check around and see what is suited for you. I already have an account set up, so I'm going to click on sign in. So I'm going to be presented with the sign in page where I have two options of signing in. Is that I sign in as the root user or as the IAM user? So I'm going to sign in as the root user. I'm the one in full control of my account. So I'm going to click on root user and I'm going to enter my username, which is my email address. So I'll click on next and I'll be asked to complete a security check. So this is Z4 XW. Set. So with that, I'm going to click on submit. And here I am in AWS dashboard. So we are going to be creating an IoT core service, which is part of the service offered by AWS. And I'm going to be configuring it to receive data from our Raspberry Pi. So you can click the list of services offered, or you can just use the search bar to search for IoT core. So I'm just going to click on IoT so that we can see other services offered by AWS. So we can see we have IoT analytics, IoT events, IoT core, IoT site-wise. You can check all of these things. They are awesome IoT services. So what we want to do is to click on IoT core. And here we are in IoT core web page. So there are a lot of things we have to be configuring here. The first thing we have to set up is to set up our security. Due to security instances, we have to set up a policy that our device is going to be based on. And the device is going to use a X.509 certificate to authenticate with AWS IoT Core. So to do that, I'm going to click on the left pane, click on security, and click on policies. So we are going to be creating our device based on this policy later on. So if you're just getting started, you're not going to see anything displayed here. So what you need to do is to click on create policy. So we're going to give the policy a name. And in this case, I'm going to give it Raspberry Pi policy. So don't forget, you can't put space or special characters. So you can only use underscore. So with that, I'm done with my policy name. So under tags, just leave this as it is. So what we need to do is to create 4 different policies, and we're going to allow them. So the first thing we have to add is IoT Connect. So make sure the policy effect is allowed and click on IoT Connect. And then we are going to put in asterisk to allow all connections that involves IoT Connect. Another option we can use is to copy the AWS ARN, but in this case, I'm going to be using asterisk so that it's going to allow all connections. For security reasons, you might not want to do this sometimes, so you might just have to copy the ARN into this space. So, but we can just leave it as asterisk for this tutorial. It's quite okay. So the next thing, we're going to be setting up IoT receive, IoT publish, and also IoT subscribe. So make sure this is also allowed and click on the policy action. So click on the IoT receive. I have it here, and also I'm going to type in asterisk. So again, click on add new statement. Make sure this is set to allowed, and this is going to be IoT publish. So we're going to be using this for pub sub events, and lastly, we are going to be putting an action of IoT subscribe. Okay, IoT subscribe, and again asterisk. So with that, we are done creating our policy. So just click on create, and then we have our policy displays. We have a success message here, successful created policy, Raspberry Pi policy. So this is my policy. You can click on it to check what it has, and you can edit various properties of the policy. So with that, we're going to be creating a device based on this policy. And in AWS, to create a device, you head over to manage all devices and click on things. So here, if you're just getting started again, this is going to be blank. So in this case, I'm going to click on create thing. So we're creating just a single thing. So check this, create single thing and click on next. So I'm going to enter a thing name. It's going to be DHT. I'll just name that Raspberry Pi DHT monitor. DHT monitor. So leave everything as it is, as default, and make sure no shadow is clicked and click on next. Again, make sure this is set to auto-generate certificate. That is recommended. So I'm going to click on next. And lastly, I'm going to click on the policy which I want to add. So the policy I created for this is Raspberry Pi policy. So I'm going to click on check it and click lastly on create thing. So in this page, I am to download all the certificates I need to connect my device to the AWS platform. So you have to download it all before you can leave this page. So I'm going to start with the public key file. So click on download. So I'm going to be saving this as private. So I have this, I'm going to be saving this as private. So this is the public key. So I'm going to be saving it as public.pem.key. So I'll just remove the trailing characters. So I'm going to overwrite this. Also click on the private key. I'm going to download the private key. Again, I'm going to remove the trailing characters and click on save. So I'll be downloading the RSA 2048-bit certificate, which is what I have here, the first one. Click on download and leave this as it is. Click on save. Also, I'll be downloading this device certificate. So click on download and I'll be removing the trailing characters here too. So I now have certificates.pem. So click on save. So with this, I can now exit this page by clicking on done. And I have my thing successfully created and I have my policy successfully created. So now my AWS platform is ready to receive data from my Raspberry Pi. Alright, if you're able to set up your AWS account and you're able to configure the AWS IoT Core, congratulations, you are done with the first part of this tutorial. In the second part of this tutorial, we're going to be setting up our Raspberry Pi to read DHT11 sensor data and also to send that data to AWS IoT Core that we just finished setting up. So I'm back on my Raspberry Pi screen. So I've been working on my Windows computer to set up my AWS account. Any other setup I want to do on my Raspberry Pi will be done on the Raspberry Pi computer. So I'm on my Raspberry Pi computer and I'm going to be setting it up to read DHT11 sensor data. I'm going to be setting up my Raspberry Pi to read DHT11 sensor data, which are temperature and humidity. Before we can successfully read the temperature and humidity from DHT11, we have to set up our Raspberry Pi. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be using the Adafruit CircuitPython library to get this done. So, to install the library for DHT11 on Raspberry Pi, just come to your browser. Here I'm using Chromium on my Raspberry Pi. And you can search for Adafruit DHT Raspberry Pi setup. So if you scroll down, just click on Python setup DHT humidity sensing on Raspberry Pi or Big Bone. So I'm going to click on this link. And on this link, we're going to see instruction and details on how we can set up a Raspberry Pi to successfully read temperature and humidity from DHT11. So the first thing we need to do is to set up our Linux board, which is our Raspberry Pi, to use Circuit Python libraries. So scroll down and click on this link, which is set up your Linux board for using Circuit Python libraries. So on this page, we're going to be setting up our Raspberry Pi to use Circuit Python libraries. So the first thing we need to do is to install the setup tools. So click on this copy test. I won't be typing this out on my terminal. I'll just click on copy and I'm going to open the terminal and paste in the code. So this is successfully done. Again, I'm going to scroll down and grab the script and run it on my terminal. So it's asking. So click, just type in Y to confirm. So while waiting for this, I've just come back to this page. So after running this, we are done setting up a Raspberry Pi to use Circuit Python. So let me go back to my terminal to see the updates. It's definitely going to get stuck here. So to just save you the time, you can press Ctrl C to cancel the operation. So with this, we are good and we can continue. So I'll just go back to this page and click on the back button to go back to the original web page. So I'm done with this step, which is setting your Linux board for using Circuit Python libraries. So I just need to grab some Circuit Python DHT library here to finish setting up my Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to grab this, which is pip install Adafruit Circuit Python DHT. So copying this, I'll come back to my terminal and paste it in. So and lastly, I'll grab it, which is sudo apt get install libgpod. So again, I'm going to copy this and paste it right into my terminal. So with this, we are done setting up your Raspberry Pi to read DHT sensor data. So to test, I'm going to copy this code and run it on my Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to copy this and open Tony. So I open the Tony Python IDE and paste this in. So we need to do some setup to make it work. So first, I'm using DHT11. So I'm going to change this to DHT11. And I'm using GPIO4. So from D18, I'm going to change this to D4. So you can leave everything else as default. And with that, we're good to go. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to run it. So you can call it DHT simple test.py. If you run this by clicking on run, you're going to be seeing your temperature and humidity. But I discovered there's a problem with this. If you run it for the first time, it's going to work perfectly. Whenever you reboot your Raspberry Pi, it's going to work perfectly. But if you try to run it again, it might not work again. So what you just need to do is to uncomment this particular line 14, and again change this to DHT 11 and change this to div 4. So whenever you're running your code, it's going to run perfectly. So to run this, I'm going to click on run. So here we have temperature and humidity coming in. I have my temperature is 86.0 degree Fahrenheit and my humidity. So this is how you can read humidity and temperature data from DHT 11 sensor. Again, I can read this from the terminal. So if I open my terminal, I'll just clear this and change directory to documents where I saved it. So I have my I'll just take where I saved this. So it's my root directory. So I'm going to change. So I have DHT simple test.py. So to run it, I can just type Python 3 DHT simple test.py. And also on the terminal, I have my temperature and humidity coming in. So that's how you can set up your Raspberry Pi to read DHT 11 sensor data. All right. If you're able to reach this point in this tutorial, I'm going to say a big congratulations to you. We are done with the first two parts of this tutorial. Now to the third part. We started by setting up AWS IoT Core. Next, we moved to setting up our Raspberry Pi to read DHT 11 sensor data. So we have been able to set up our Raspberry Pi to read DHT 11 sensor data. Now we are going to be setting up our Raspberry Pi to send that data to Amazon Web Services IoT Core. So what we want to do is to come over to the terminal, and as usual, we're going to be running sudo apt-get update. You might choose not to run this again if you follow with the last section. So if you run sudo apt-get update, it's going to update the dependencies. So that is apt-get. Apt-get, my bad. Okay, yeah. And also you can run sudo apt-get upgrade. I'm not going to be running this, but you can run it in your own case. So sudo apt-get upgrade. I just finished updating my Raspberry Pi, so I'm not going to do that again. So next we want to do is to install CMake, because we're going to be building some libraries. So just type in sudo apt-get install CMake. So CMake is a build system for C++. So I'm going to run this, and because I have it installed already, it says CMake is already the newest version. So next I'm going to be installing the libssl-dev. So again, type in sudo apt-get install libssl dev. Okay, yeah, libssl-dev. So install this, and because I already have it installed, it says the following package will automatically installed, so are no longer required. So another thing you need to install that probably you may have on your Raspberry Pi is Git and also Python 3. So the first thing you want to install is to install Git. If Git is not already installed, to check if Git is already installed, just type git --version. So I have Git installed on my Raspberry Pi. Probably you have it installed on your own too. It's going to display the version of Git. If you don't have Git installed, you can just type in sudo apt-get install Git. And with this, if you run this, Git will be installed on your Raspberry Pi. Sudo apt-get install Git. So another thing we need to install is Python 3. Probably you have Python 3 running on your computer already. So if not, you can just, if you want to check, you can just type in Python. That's Python 3. Again, --version. So if you have Python 3 installed, it's going to display the version of Python 3 that you have. And in case you do not have, you can just type in sudo apt-get install Python 3. Note this is Python 3, not Python 2. So sudo apt-get install Python 3 is going to download Python 3 for you. And lastly, what we're going to check for is pip3. pip3, which is Python package manager. So to check if you have pip3 installed already, probably you have this installed. You can just type in pip3 dash dash version, and I'm sure you have it installed. So just to check, so it's going to show me the version of pip3 that I have, and that is of version Python 3.9. And if for any reason you don't have pip3 installed, you can just type in sudo apt get, I don't need get here, so apt install Python 3 pip. Make sure this is Python 3 pip, and with this you have Python 3 pip installed on your computer. So with that, we are done with some of the modules we have to install before you can send data to AWS IoT. So the next thing you have to install is to install the AWS IoT device SDK for Python. And I'll go back to my home directory. Okay, I'm already there, and I'm going to be installing it. So just type in Python. So that is not correct. Python 3, okay. So -m pip, I want to use Python 3 pip install AWS IoT SDK. So if you run this code, AWS IoT SDK will be installed on your computer. So Python 3 -m pip install AWS IoT SDK. So I already have it installed, says requirements already satisfied. If I just run this on your computer, you might have to wait for it to install some modules. And after that, I'm going to be cloning a repository that contains the sample code. So type in git clone h. So and you can, instead of typing this, I'm going to give the details on my GitHub page, so you can just copy and paste it. But I still have to type it. So github.com/AWS/ So you know what? I think I'm just going to zoom this so that you can see it better. You know what? I'm not going to zoom it. I think it's visible. So https github.com/AWS/AWS IoT device SDK Python v2.git. So if you are done, just run this command. So because I've already have it installed, it's saying already exists. And if you are just setting it up, you might have to wait a little bit for this to be cloned to your local repository. So with that, we are done installing the AWS IoT SDK. So the next thing we want to do is to create our certificate and put them in a particular folder. So after cloning the repository, if you head over to the Py directory, you're going to see that we have the repository available here, AWS IoT Device SDK Python v2. So what we want to do now is to copy the certificates that we download while working on AWS to our Raspberry Pi window. So I've just head over to my personal computer and copy the certificate files and bring them to my Raspberry Pi. And don't forget, I'm accessing my Raspberry Pi via headless, so I can send via FNC terminal from my Raspberry Pi to my personal computer, or from my personal computer to my Raspberry Pi. So I'll just head over to this panel and click on the transfer files. So I've searched for where the files are on my computer, and here I have them, AWS credentials. I'm going to copy them and click on open. And with this, I have all the files already transferred to my Raspberry Pi. Don't forget, you can't just copy and paste because these are two different computers. And after having all the files on my desktop, I've just come to my Pi directory and create a folder here called certs, CERTS, okay? Oh, why is saying file already exists? Do I have any files? Okay, I think I've already created before. So I'll just copy all this and paste it into the, let me just cut and paste into the sats folder. Yes. So I have my sats created in the same directory that AWS device SDK is, and inside it I have all the certificates that I downloaded from AWS. So there's one last thing that we need to copy from AWS, which is the endpoint. So that's the IoT endpoint. So I'll head over back to my personal computer window and download that straight away. As I mentioned, apart from the certificates, the last thing you need before you can connect to your thing is the IoT endpoint of that particular thing. So this is the thing that we created. I'm going to click on it and it's going to display the dashboard of our thing. Okay, while waiting for that, there's a faster way we can do this by just going to settings, but I'll just go through the steps. So if you come to interact, you're going to see that the device data endpoint has moved to settings. So if I click view settings, and it's going to display my IoT endpoint, which I have here. So this is the IoT endpoint of this particular thing. So I'm going to be copying this and I'm going to be using it in my Raspberry Pi window. So I'll just copy this and create a text file, paste this in, and also send it to my Raspberry Pi. So I can just copy and paste, because I can't directly copy and paste from my Raspberry Pi window to my personal computer, or from my personal computer to my Raspberry Pi window. So I don't want to type this one by one. I'll just put it in a text file and send it to the Raspberry Pi. So here I have a notepad open. I've just copied this again and paste it in. And I'm going to call it endpoint. So while I'm doing this, if you can type this out, it's better. There's no need to do it. I'm doing it because I can't copy directly from my desktop to my Raspberry Pi window. So I'll just call this endpoint. So the same way I transfer the certificates from my computer to my Raspberry Pi, I'm going to do the same thing for endpoint. So click on save. I'll come to my VNV viewer, open my Raspberry Pi window. The same way, come to transfer files, send files, and I click on endpoint. So if I click open, it has transferred. And if I click on endpoint, I can easily just copy from here and paste it into my code. So with that, we are done with our certificates and also our endpoint. So it's now time to run the code. So after setting up these all processes, the last thing is to run the code. So I don't want to bore you with the process of writing the old code. I've already created project code here on my desktop. So what you need to do, I'm going to leave the link to this code in the description below. So just copy the code from wherever you download it from the desktop. I'll just copy it and head over to my repository, the repository I cloned the other time, the AWS IoT Device SDK. So open it up, open samples, and paste the code in there. Why we need to paste this code here is because some of these files, they are one of the modules that we use inside this code. So they are necessary for this code to work. So this is the code. You can open it up. Just make sure that before you run it, it's inside the samples folder. So I've already edited. I've added functionalities to take data from DHT, and I've passing the line to send DHT data to AWS IoT Core. So to run this code, if you check this line 113 to 114, here I'm taking my temperature and humidity reading, and here I'm publishing it to AWS IoT Core. So to run this code, head over to the terminal and take note, here we are going to be writing a long string of command. So I'm going to run the code using Python 3, and the code is named AWS DHT RPI dot py. So after passing the name of the code, you have to pass in the topic is going to be publishing on. So dash dash topic, and I'm going to call this RPI DHT. So after passing that, we're going to be passing it the device certificate. So just input dash dash ca underscore file. And again, if I open up my project, my Raspberry Pi folder, so as part of the certificate we downloaded the other time, if I open up the sat folder, here I have my device certificate, which is the root certificate as Amazon root ca.pem. So I'm going to be passing it the CA certificate. So let me just put this so that I can see it while working. So the CA file is inside the home directory /sat/ Amazon root ca1.pem. So after passing that, I also need to pass in the certificate.pem.crt. So again, I'm going to put in under dash dash sat, again from the home directory /sat/ so my certificate is named certificate.pem.crt. So again, certificate.pem.crt. And lastly, I'm going to be passing in the private key. Take note that for this tutorial, we are not going to be using the public key. So, but we are only using the private key. So again, I'm going to be passing in the option dash dash key. Again, from my root directory /sat/ and it's named private.pem.key. Private.pem.key. So make sure everything is written correctly. So lastly, we are going to be passing in the endpoints that we copied from our AWS team. So again, dash dash endpoint. And don't forget, I transferred the endpoint from my computer to the Raspberry Pi. So, and it's saved on my desktop. So I'll just open this and copy it. So I'm going to copy the endpoint and I'll just paste it in here. Paste. So make sure all this is written correctly and everything is okay. So once you have everything written correctly, then you can run this code. So I have a problem now saying, oh, sorry, I'm trying to run the code from the wrong directory. So let me just navigate to the project directory. Okay. So that's AWS IoT Device SDK /samples. And now I can run the code. So as you can see, I have my Raspberry Pi publishing the temperature and the humidity. So it's publishing temperature and humidity now. But the question is, how do we view it on AWS console? So to view the data that's been sent from Raspberry Pi, we're going to be subscribing to the topic on the AWS console. So I'm going to be opening up my AWS console. Now on my AWS team window. So to view the data that's been sent from the Raspberry Pi, so we head over to the left pane and click on MQTT test client. So from here we are going to be subscribing to the topic that is being published by the Raspberry Pi. So on this page, we have option to subscribe to a particular topic. And if you check from the command that we are running, I call the topic AWS DHT. So I'm going to be subscribing to the topic AWS DHT. So once I click subscribe, so whenever I'm sending data from the Raspberry Pi now, I'll be able to view it on this page. So let me, so that we can check the two simultaneously. So to make it easier for us to visualize, I've opened the two screens side by side. So this is my DHC, this is my Raspberry Pi screen, and this is my AWS screen. So if I try to run the code again, you see this topic is called RPI DHT. So I just have to subscribe to the topic on my AWS and click on type in RPI DHT and click on subscribe. So I'm now subscribed to the topic. So whenever any message is coming on this topic, I'll be able to see it on my AWS. So let me run the code on my Raspberry Pi. So as you can see, as it's being published there, I'm receiving the message on my AWS. If I maximize this, so this is the message I'm receiving. I'm receiving my temperature, which is 24 degrees Celsius, and humidity, which is 95.0%. So that's simply how you can send data from Raspberry Pi to AWS IoT Core. So from here, you can take this message, you can use it in visualization, in analytics, or in machine learning, depending on your organizational need. So thank you very much, and if you find this tutorial useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on the notification bar so that you'll be informed whenever I release a new tutorial. So that's it on how to send data from Raspberry Pi to AWS IoT Core. And in this tutorial, we send data from Raspberry Pi using the DHC 11 sensor data. Thank you.